Okay, so let's begin with talking a little bit about what you've been known for before The Sculptor.
Sure.
You have been known for some years now as the nonfiction guy. Your three graphic novel works that are nonfiction are Understanding Comics, Reinventing Comics, and Making Comics. And all of them deconstruct the medium and talk about how storytelling is engineered within the medium. You've talked about yourself as being sort of engineered inclined.
Yeah. Son of an engineer.
Yeah, son of an engineer. So how does the act of reverse engineering what makes comics as a medium work feed into creating fiction in comics?
Well, why do we reverse engineer anything? It's so that we can then turn it around and engineer in forward and drive to rebuild it, take it apart, figure out how it works, and rebuild it. And I guess that's what I did, just in slow motion over the course of 25 years, 30 years. Oh my God, it's probably some really scary number. I just, when it all started, the whole reason why I was deconstructing comics in the first place was because I was trying to figure out how to make them when I did my first series, Zod. So it had a very practical origin point, but then the stuff became so fascinating in and of itself that I began to isolate it and think, I should make this thing a book. So now it's kind of come full circle, like Haley's comment. Now, all of that deconstruction seemed only to have a purpose unless I could test drive it, unless I could see, does this thing really launch? Or does it blow up on the launch pad?
Well, one of the things I find really interesting about The Sculptor is that I'm trying... This is going to be challenging because I'm trying not to spoil the book for those of you that haven't had the chance to read it yet, but I think that given that this is a main theme, the fact that David functionally gets a superpower that allows him to art really hard.
Absolutely,
right?
That's the best description I've heard.
Thank you. So how do you approach writing a character that functionally does not have to learn how to make art in the way that you had to learn how to make art? He doesn't have to reverse engineer. He just thinks about what he wants to make, and the creation magically happens. Is that sort of a fantasy for someone who has to reverse engineer to figure out how to do the same thing process-wise?
It might be a fantasy particular to me, because I'm Mr. Comics Without Limits. Like during my digital comics heyday, I was all about, hey, what if we just remove the page and we can make comics that go on for 10,000 panels on a giant rotating Persian carpet wrapped around the moon with elephants dancing on it. And people would say, now, Scott, art is defined by its limitations. And unless you struggle against limitations, then there's no art there. And, I have all kinds of clever answers to that, but it's sort of off topic. But here, okay, we have a character who all physical limitations that had been holding him back, or so he thought, just vanish overnight. And now he's coming face to face with the ultimate limitation, and that's the limitation of your own imagination, the limitation of your own understanding of what it is you wanted from art in the first place. And this is where he first hits a wall. Be careful what you wish for. Now, of course, in a way, I'm critiquing him as a character in the same way people were critiquing me, thinking that, if you just take away all the boundaries, well, it'll be disaster, just you wait, and that's exactly what happens to some extent, is it doesn't go well. It doesn't go well when he has this sculptor. What did you say? What he arts
his
really hard.
Superpower to art really hard.
He can art really hard.
He can art
That's
really
so
hard.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. See, my night is complete just about that.
So, one of the things I'm curious about in terms of your working process, I know you've got some things that you want to show us about your constructive process. One of the things I'd like you to touch on while you're doing that is how your process for storytelling, does it change significantly when you're working on deconstructive nonfiction versus telling a fictional story? Does the process for producing the panels and the art and the words, does that differ between the two modes of storytelling for you?
Yeah, one of the biggest differences between fiction and nonfiction when you're talking about a book, and people would often call things like Understanding Comics graphic novels, which just shows how completely the term is deteriorated, but whatever, book-length comics, big fat comics with a spine. When you're doing nonfiction, you can silo content. So you can say, in this chapter I'm talking about this thing, and it's okay that it doesn't necessarily directly link up to the things you're talking about in chapter 7 or chapter 3, you're able to shrink down your arena and only be within that one subject area, and sometimes even sub-subject areas. Here in these 3 panels, I'm going to talk about this. You don't worry about the rest. In fiction, if you're doing a novel, a graphic novel, if you really want to live up to the promise or the implicit promise of that term, you have to make sure that every element of the work has a relationship to every other element at all times. You have to make sure that the casual comment on page 3 is in some way related to the themes brought out on page 403. You have to always be aware of the themes. And so it's the complexity of the work actually rises exponentially. There's kind of a geometric build of complexity as you go. It's the old sort of weight to mass ratio thing. It doesn't matter. It's like a nerdy thing, but like if you go to double this, then that's 4 times that, and it's whatever. But so it became tremendously complicated, but in a good way, because I actually got enough time and space by my very, very understanding and supportive editor and publisher to get it right. But it took me 2 years just to do the layouts before I ever drew a single finished panel, and it was partially because of that. It was partially making sure that all the parts reflected the whole. Because when you do that, it's like a living organism. It's like the way that our bodies, all of the circulatory and pulmonary systems and everything all works together. That's what you want your fiction to be like. You want it to breathe. You want it to have a beating heart, and that's the way you do it.
So tell us a little bit about your process for actually producing the art and the words.
Yeah, sure.
You've got.
I have pictures.
You have pictures.
Oh my God.
Yay.
Oh yes, I do. Okay, yeah. Here, this is where it all began. Was this 3-ring binder that I had in high school? That's denim cover. This is the 70s. Actual denim and a blue ballpoint pen. But this is where I first jotted down this crazy idea for this kind of superpowered sculptor. It's a kid's idea. It's a teenager's idea. But the story kept kicking around in my head. I liked it as time went on, the deal with death, and especially the romance inspired by this woman I was secretly in love with for 7 years, who I would later marry. So we finally did. I was so trying to squeeze an awe out of you. So finally I decide, after decades, literally decades, this has been in my back pocket, I thought, I got to do this story. I start to really like the story and realize, no, this is a good story if it's done right. So just as I make that decision, it's like, okay, Scott, time to go on our year-long tour of all 50 states. It's like, can't draw anything. So all I did was sit in the passenger seat. I'm not allowed to drive. I'm a terrible driver. And I just thought for a year about the story and took lots and lots of notes. But then we got a publisher, we started to work on it, and then I started on the layouts. This is what my layouts look like. This is an actual screenshot in Photoshop of 40 pages of layouts. I was working 40 pages at a time. And the reason I did that is because when you do that, it's very detailed stuff. If you look closely at any given panel, where you see the words, that's the very first time I wrote that dialogue was in the form of that word balloon, right? Those word balloons. And I have them in a row like this because then it gets to reflow like word processors. I can take a panel out of the sequence and I can move it up to this sort of tray, this white conveyor belt up top there. And I can store panels up there until they're ready to be reintroduced into the narrative, and then everything can just reflow to accommodate the reintroduction. And the reason I do this is because then I have this nice kind of forward flow of the narrative. Everything just kind of flows forward panel to panel to panel without getting too hung up on individual pages. But eventually, the axe comes down. I choose the composition for the pages. I bring it into Adobe Illustrator where I do my lettering and my panel borders. And if you want, there are some YouTube videos online where I have little demos on how I letter my comics. And then those create this. And what you're looking at right now, you see the white space here? That's the solid stuff. There's windows. The panels are actually windows. Behind the windows are the word balloons, and behind the word balloons are the art. That's how the layers are set up. So I'm drawing behind what are literally windows. And I have all these actions in Photoshop, so I can do all of these things that would ordinarily be repeated tasks, going, now they're much quicker. I can just hit a button. And I did it all on a Cintiq tablet, which has these side buttons that allows me to change my tools without ever looking away from the art. So it's very organic. It's very intuitive for me. So this is a hand-drawn book. This is me drawing it. I'm actually right-handed. This is flopped. But that's what it looks like. And you see, I'm just like looking at the page, looking at the page, looking at the page. And when I bring the layouts in, they look like this at first. See, I knock them out to blue, and then I might introduce a grid for perspective, and then I just build it up, and build it up, and build it up, and build it up until it looks to me like a finished panel, and I'm done. So yeah, that's what it looks like. Thank you.
Thanks for making my job easy tonight.
That's the only canned thing I have that goes on that long. The rest I'm on my own.
So let's talk about the book a little bit, some more. One of the things that struck me was that part of David's arc is that he has to make what is functionally a major choice for artists. He has to choose between the superpower, the ability to art really hard for 200 days, and then he can't. Yeah. Spoiler.
It's okay. It's on the back cover.
The path not the path not taken in this deal with death is also laid out for him. He's told, you can find a wonderful person to be partnered with. You can get a job at a community college and maybe teach for a while. You can have a life that is stable and comfortable and possibly find a modicum of contentment and security of some kind. And you may not art quite as hard in the parlance that I'm using tonight, but you could have longevity and leave other things behind besides your art.
Right.
So
he sees what it would be.
He sees what it would be.
To have an ordinary life.
Right. So is part of the challenge of writing a novel like this, coming at it from the genesis of the idea when you're young and hungry and not thinking about you're not thinking when you're 19, 20 about 40, 50 and later, right? You're not thinking in those terms. You're thinking about now and wanting to do it now and wanting to do it before you lose whatever it is that's compelling you to do it.
Yeah, counting the days. You're 26 years old and you're already, I'm washed up.
Exactly. So how do you navigate as someone who clearly, this is not a superpower for you, this is a lot of hard work over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Hard work.
Hard work
is a kind of superpower.
It is a kind of superpower. Hard work, organization, and being nice, totally a superpower. How do you balance family life with this level of work, given that you didn't choose the path that David has of pushing people away, of being as completely self-contained as you can as a person and not interacting with a community? Even though in this book there is plenty of community around David if he chooses to see it, but he chooses to withdraw.
No,
so I'd like
a much more narrow path for
I'd
him,
like you to talk a little bit about that tension for artists in general and yourself in particular, about genius and community and life and eating.
Well, the eating, I never gave up on eating, but this was a going concern for me. And, when I was first married, we fought a lot more when I was first married, but there was also that tension constantly, of like, when are you going to get off work? All you do is work, I never see you, that sort of thing. What we found later in life was we found this dynamic balance where it was understood. I was going to work really, really hard for a long time, 11 hours a day, 12 hours a day for like 7 days a week for years. But then when I was done, we play, right? So that's hence the 50-state tour, and hence the months that Ivy and I have already been like traveling like crazy, and we're going to do even more this year. I mean, I'm in the middle of 14 cities in 16 days, and then we're doing several European countries, and it's just going to be nuts. But so that's a work hard, play hard kind of balance. Mm-hmm. But for me, it suits me to really, really dive in and become very monomaniacal like that. And, Ivy has discovered fan fiction and any number of other things to keep her busy, and, it's just like, it's okay, go. And we make the most of our 2 or 3 hours a night, We love going to movies, we do stuff. But so we found the balance. But that theme is so primal for me. I used to listen to Sunday in the Park with George, appropriate here, the Art Institute, and just, cry. Tears would be streaming down my face, when Dot leaves, and because it's about George Seurat, just like he's got to work all the time, and they can't go to the Follies, and what a dick. And I'm gonna go find a real guy, to hang out with. But that really spoke to me. That was a very, very intense thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just the thing is, this guy has 200 days to live, right? He has a limited number of days. We all have a limited number of days. We just don't know the number. So all of us make that choice. Every artist makes that choice every single day. Is that they're pouring their minutes and their hours and their days into what? Into some kind of abstract hope, some concept of the longevity of what they leave behind. And we always tell ourselves, artists are always telling ourselves, since we have so few earthly rewards, that, well, just you wait. They'll be talking about me in 100 years. And isn't that a kind of afterlife, This is a book. This is a very religious book from an atheist. I've come to realize this is about religion. It's about the secular religion of art, of aesthetics, and of that hope that something of you will last, that you're sacrificing the here and now in hopes that there's some kind of amorphous legacy lurking for you. That's an afterlife. Even a stone-cold atheist believes in an afterlife of a sort.
So do you think that given the opportunity, if Death decided to sit down and have coffee with you?
Oh, hell no. Because I get to have my cake and eat it too. Dude, I'm living the dream without having to die at 26. I get to make stuff that has at least a decent chance of still being around a while. And of course, really, the story also is about gradually coming to terms with the fact that no matter what you do, even if you are Shakespeare or Bach or Beethoven, it doesn't matter.
Well, Shakespeare wasn't even really Shakespeare in his time.
No, he wasn't.
He didn't become Shakespeare until
also,
the 19th
did you know
century.
that the works of Homer were not written by Homer, but by another Greek of the same name? So, makes you think. So, no, but these guys, they're all going, the heat death of the universe is not going to be any kinder to them than us. Mm-hmm. We're all going down together, And you can take some comfort in that, I do. Cheerful disposition, I don't know.
So on that cheerful note, since we're discussing the heat death of the universe, let's also tackle mental illness.
Sure.
Both David and Meg struggle with different kinds of mental illness in this novel. David is when we first meet David, he's in the clutches of a really nasty depressive bout. And Meg comes across as bipolar or manic depressive. Can you talk a little bit about your choices when handling mental illness in a storytelling mode, particularly given that you've been very open about the fact that Meg in particular is based on your wife, Ivy?
Yeah, and Ivy's okay with us talking about this. What's really fantastic is just now, when you said the thing about how both of them suffer from mental illness, I was like, oh yeah.
See, it takes a critic or an academic to tell the artist what the work is really about.
Because my artist is not as much based on me as the character of Meg is based on my wife, but he's about 40% me. And what's really great is how I'm like, he has all these crazy promises to himself, and he always just sits and works and is really intense and gets really angry at everybody all the time for nothing. And well, that's normal, right? Because I never thought about it until you said it. It's like, he's pretty messed up too. I just thought, I didn't think it was so much a mental illness as just that he was a little bit of a dickhead. But he kind of is. He's kind of, as a matter of fact, lately, it's a cinematic book, and, it's crossed people's minds that this might be a movie sometime. And the more I think about it, the more I realize if on film, you would probably see much more clearly that he would like maybe have some OCD tics, or that he would, be a little sort of on the spectrum or something. As am I think, really, the more I've lived, I've come to realize that. But Meg's, I'm sorry, we got way off topic.
No, it's okay.
No, but Meg's more interesting. It's just
they're both really interesting.
All of a sudden I realized, oh, right, I didn't notice he's crazy because I'm crazy, right. But Meg, what happened with Meg was many things. At the beginning, Ivy had inspired the character of Meg, but I had come to realize that I had to be pretty ruthless when mining my own life and our relationship for the character. And if it was for the good of the story, if I needed to jettison a lot of that stuff and allow her to become someone else entirely, I had to do that. I couldn't just make it my own little private birthday present or something like that. So I had to allow the character to drift away from Ivy. And I did. At the beginning, in the early drafts, I allowed her to drift away and become less like Ivy. But she came drifting back. Ivy exerted a kind of gravity on her, especially whenever I would sit down to write what she said, the words would come out. There are things that Meg says in this book that are straight out of conversations. Ivy and I, when we first got together, very beginning of our relationship, said to me, I'm going to try to push you away. Promise me you won't let me push you away. That was a real thing. And, I'm happy to say I kept my promise. There are some differences in terms of the way I handle it. Meg, in my book, Meg plunges into somewhat longer, depressive things. With Ivy, like a lot of people who have ups and downs, her ups and downs were more or less daily, I would say. I mean, they're pretty frequent. In Meg's case, they have a longer duration. She'd be fine for a while and then kind of tumble. And I had a long conversation with somebody years ago who suffered from that particular tendency, who would just have really bad months, that sort of thing, or bad weeks. So I knew that existed in the world. I didn't sort of think of her so much as just pure bipolar, because her ups, and this is true, I think, as near as I can tell, this is true of a number of people out there. Her ups are simply she's just on top of things. And that actually has kind of a calm to her. She's just very charming, charismatic, and capable. She's not like, ooh, flibberty-gibbet, like, oh, I can't stand still, which would have, I think, been kind of, irritating.
So not manic pixie dream.
Well,
Ivy.
but that's that's a whole other kettle of fish. We can get to that. But yeah, it would have been, I think, more in your face like that. But I don't know. In the end, I began with this really early on, and it became so entwined with the mechanics of the story that now it was right there. It was like the soul in the spaceship. There was no extracting that aspect of the character.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn a little bit to talking about some of your other work and the industry in a general sense, because it's a change of topic, and why not? Because I can do that. I'm the moderator. Ha ha.
You can do anything. You can start talking about llamas.
I could.
I can't stop you.
I don't know enough about llamas to start talking about it. I'm not even willing to try to fake my way through it. What I would like to know about, though, is let's start with the Creators' Bill of Rights, because in 1998, you were hanging out in Northampton, Massachusetts, and you were...
Actually, I should... 88.
1988.
I dropped
the
decades
text on this
too.
is very small. In 88, you were hanging out in Northampton, Massachusetts with a bunch of other comics creators, and there was a big discussion going on about creators' rights. And this is at a time that is before the comics... The comics industry is beginning to boom. It's before the bottom falls out from the speculator market. And you have several generations of comics creators who, in a work-for-hire environment, did not own the rights to their creations, were not being paid when those creations would become intellectual property that then makes lots and lots of money for the corporations that own said intellectual property. So you sat down and drafted, based on these conversations with your colleagues, a Creators' Bill of Rights that lays out things that you thought at the time were deeply important for creators of comics within this medium to think about and push for and not sign contracts that don't give you these rights. Can you talk a little bit about the rights that are so deeply important to the creators in the industry, and also it's been a little while since 1988. Can you talk a little bit about how you think the industry has changed based on that work, and would you do anything differently now if you had to write the Creators' Bill of Rights today? So, just a small question.
Yeah. Well, just a bit of background. I was brought into a kind of Creators Summit, which was a follow-up to something that happened in Toronto. And the real ringleaders were Dave Sim, the Turtle Guys, and some people who weren't at that second meeting that I was at, like Frank Miller and Alan Moore. But basically, there were these industry disputes that nobody remembers, things from the Jurassic era, distribution wars and things like that. And Dave, Sim, and I in particular came at it from a very different angle. Dave wanted to state a kind of absolute declaration of, it was almost like a declaration of human rights. It was like we have the right to this and that and this and that and this and that. I was just thinking more in terms of just relationships with publishers. And I just felt that we had the power to not sign away our rights if we just didn't sign away our rights, But an important thing to remember is the Turtle Guys were there.
Yes.
This was the Turtle Guys' backyard.
As in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Exactly. Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, who were a couple of pals of ours who had a cute little comic, and oh, look, $60 million just rained down on top of us. And why they didn't sign away their rights is why. And so we had this shining example of what happens when you don't do what Siegel and Schuster did, the people who created Superman, and just sign it all away on the back of your first check. That really happened. And so we had a counterexample. But basically, the reason I proposed it, well, first of all, they had this creative manifesto that nobody could make heads or tails of. It was very confusing and weird. So I thought, let's come up with something clear. So I came up with this list. And the list was roughly, we have the right to own what we fully create. We have the right to creative control of what we own. We have the right to be consulted on things like distribution. We have the right to a fair share of profits. We have the right to get our original artwork back. Just things that now sound, I think, pretty reasonable. I don't want to exaggerate the influence that it had on people because I think a lot of these changes would have happened anyway. Image Comics came along afterwards. Some of the same players were involved, but I think they might have still broken off from Marvel. This is, the big Image revolution. This was so long ago, nobody remembers. But basically, a bunch of really popular artists decided to go it alone, and they created Image Comics, which is still a going concern today. But basically, I guess what I was trying to do is what I always tried to do, which is just try to distill the essence of a thing. And to me, it was that we had all the rights in the world. All we had to do was just not sign them away. And, oh, hey, let's make a list. They're just very practical. Just like my dad, the engineer, I was thinking in a very practical way. But, like so many things like this, it didn't have an immediate effect. It just had a very gradual effect. It just hung out there in the background, kind of like this little distant lighthouse for each successive generation. And now people still refer back to it on, things like contracts with people on the web or, Comixology or whatever. I mean, like it comes up again and again now.
So, speaking of the web, let's talk about comics and the internet.
Oh, God.
What could possibly go
Do
wrong?
we have time?
So, one of the things I did in preparation for this was to read Making Comics, which I hadn't experienced before. I am a graduate of the Understanding Comics School, as many people in this room likely are back in the day. One of the things that you talked about in Making Comics, of course, and in Reinventing Comics is the shift in technology, because, of course, this whole work was produced in a digital environment. There was no pen to paper there until you're autographing the physically printed books.
Right. But prepared
for print.
Yeah.
So how do you think, since you postulated the changes that might come about because of the internet in Making Comics and Reinventing Comics, how do you think you did with your prognostications?
I don't know. I'm about 50-50 at this point. There were a lot of things that I thought would have happened by now that didn't.
Okay, like what?
Well, my most famous one was I was hoping that we'd have. Actually, we do kind of have money for content now, but it's a little different. I wanted there to be some way to just drop nickels and dimes into each other's pockets, because that'd be a really great way to support a creative economy. If you make a comic and it's really cool, well, why? You should just get like 25 cents for it, not $2, not $3, because you've just eliminated that army of middlemen. Why should you be making the same amount of money you were making before? That's why it kind of saddened me when the prices on songs and movies and all weren't that different from the prices down at Best Buy. I mean, like, you don't have an army of guys in trucks. You don't have the warehouses. You don't have the shipping. You don't have the printing costs. Why should it cost as much as it does? But that didn't quite come about. I've joked since that what I was trying to do was reinvent the entire world economy so I could have a job in it. I paired up with a couple of Stanford grads who had a company called BitPass, and they gave it a shot. Not Bitcoin, although there are a couple of funny, weird parallels. But still, the idea of a freestanding internet currency is still hanging out there. Because if you have that, then things can get very interesting very fast. But there are a lot of countries that don't really, like all of them, that don't necessarily want that to happen. So it's still in flux, but what you get then is you get an ad-supported environment, you get a tchotchke-supported environment, where people make mugs and t-shirts, and you get donations, and it's donations that got really interesting lately with things like Kickstarter and Patreon. Kickstarter you've probably heard of. Patreon is more recent, and it's where people can just say, hey, you know what, I like your comic, I'm just going to give you $1 a month. I'm just going to press this little button, and now every month $1 comes out of my account and goes into your pocket. And Zach Weinersmith of Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal is getting close to $10,000 a month. Has he crossed it yet?
Wow.
$10,000 a month.
Good for him.
So yeah,
it's a great comic.
Yeah. So the one idea that I did have that in a way we're seeing a demonstration of the power of it is just the simple fact that the consumer, the reader, the audience, when they pull $1 out of their pocket, that dollar doesn't get shredded to a dime. Mm-hmm. It's just a dime gets pulled off the top. Now it's 90 cents. And now we're seeing the power of those thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of readers, what they can actually do when they just say, I like you, and then boom, pile of money.
Living the dream.
Yeah, which is kind of cool.
So one of the other things that the internet has made possible in ways that really weren't possible when the comics distribution network was strictly paper and guys in trucks based, is the ability to contact creators and the ability for fans and consumers to directly interact with the people that are making the art that they consume, for good and for ill, depending on what their opinion of your work is.
Oh, yeah.
One of the other things that has come out of this is something that you talked about in Making Comics. You talked in Making Comics about the fact that the current comics industry at that point was only getting a teeny tiny slice of the possible audience. It was pretty much aimed at white males 18 to 34, the golden demographic for money. But the comics industry has become much wider and much louder, in part thanks to the internet. And it's become slightly more diverse. Has it become as diverse in terms of creators who are doing different kinds of work and creators from all kinds of backgrounds from all over the world? Has it become as diverse as you had hoped it would when you made that argument in Making Comics?
Come on. Of course not. I mean, I'm shooting for the rafters. I was hoping we could hit a home run. But we did well. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've made progress. There were 3 fronts. There was diversity of content. In other words, diversity of genre. Comics about a lot of different things. Then there was diversity of ethnic and background, the mm-hmm. diversity of the characters and the people behind the drawing boards. Racial diversity, ethnic diversity. And then there was gender balance. Can't say gender diversity, although actually nowadays, we can say gender diversity.
You totally can.
Absolutely. Let's say gender diversity. So I think that on the first and the third, I think we're doing pretty good. Mm-hmm. And I still have this standing bet that I made years ago that by 2024 we're going to have a majority female industry. Just watch. I got money on that one. So I do think we're gonna write those scales, mm-hmm. And we're getting tremendous genre diversity in large part because you can't squash a genre. The genre doesn't have to be on the shelves in a store that you have to go through the front door of. You can come in through the side door, simply like, hey, I like video games. What's this? Oh, it's a comic. I've never read a comic, but it's about something that I like, and so I'm going to be reading comics before I know it. So that sort of proliferation of genres happens a lot online, and that's just been fantastic. And then it comes back to the shelves. We are still, I have to say, kind of pale as a creative community. I mean, sorry. We've got to work on that one. But the gender balance thing that's, we've really seen tremendous progress in a relatively short time. These things can flip very quickly. Sometimes you just need one or two key people to inspire whole communities to say, oh, wow, I could do that. And boom, there you go.
Sure. So you probably have also witnessed, and this is the last question before we open up for Q&A.
Sure.
You've probably also witnessed a certain amount of pushback from what was originally considered the target community of people for whom comic books are generally considered, particularly before the age of the internet, to be made. You see things like pushback from folks who don't think that there need to be superheroes who are not white, for instance. Yeah. When we talk about movie casting, when we talk about the Marvel Unlimited universe, for instance, the Miles Morales Spider-Man versus Peter Parker.
Donald Glover's Spider-Man.
Yeah, exactly.
So awesome.
So
I was like, Ivy and I were talking the other day and just thinking, Sculptor, Donald Glover. Wouldn't be bad.
So do you have a take on sort of the experience of seeing that pushback as the diversity in this community grows, which clearly you think is a good thing? What's your response or your take on the pushback that sometimes happens when people perceive that they are no longer going to be the default?
I'm going to disappoint you here and just say, first and foremost, I don't seem to visit those message boards. I know it's happening. I read about it on The Beat. I read about it on Comics Reporter, and it's like, ooh, that's terrible. But I almost never see it firsthand because I'm not finding out what people think of, the new Miss Marvel or what. I'm not reading those message boards. So I don't see the really nasty stuff. I just hear about it third hand. I think probably the best thing you can say about comics is, well, it's not as bad as what's going on in gaming right now. Because I don't know why we kind of worked it out a few decades ago. Maybe we've been around longer or something. But I really think, what I said this is a parallel situation with those who just had prejudice against comics themselves. Prejudice comes in many stripes, but it comes from some of the same basic instincts. It's just, eventually they die. Eventually these people, if each successive generation is more and more accepting. I look at my kids' generation, they're so terrific. I mean, I'm always getting schooled, and when what was it? I was talking about something that was going on in the world, and I was talking about this is this is just crazy. They're just blind to the reality. And my daughter, who is blind and bipolar, is like, now, Dad, there's two problems with that sentence. One, you're neurotypical and you're ableist, and I'm like, thanks, Sky, I'm working on it, So, but that's their generation. It's going to be so much better at this, and sometimes those toxins can be worked out from direct intervention, and sometimes you carry them with you to your grave. But I mean, look at what incredible progress we've made, just on an aesthetic level, and what incredible progress we've made in terms of diversity and gender balance already. I really think that it's going to get a lot better, and it's going to get better, I think, kind of soon. Because soon, it's getting very close to that point where to express the kind of prejudice and hate that you're talking about is going to be just increasingly uncool. And if you want to, if you want to hang out with anyone, you kind of have to put a lid on it, buddy. It'll get better.
Okay. Thank you, Scott, for letting me grill you. Now it's the audience's turn. there will be some Chicago Humanities Festival staffers wandering around who have microphones in their hands, and I've got one right over here. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Hi. In Understanding Comics, you write about closure, the process of inferring motion between panels. I'm curious, and this might be a terrible question because I'm not an artist myself, what is the most difficult motion you've ever had to try to capture in still images, and what's the most difficult closure you've ever asked of your readers?
I'm not sure that I can pull it up out of my memory, but human motion is certainly one of the hardest for me because I have trouble drawing people. I asked some friends to pose for me on this book because I knew if it was going to have any verisimilitude, any warmth to it, that I was going to have to ask them to help me. I'm pretty good at showing motion the way that they do in Japan. I really like subjective motion, as I call it, where you're moving with the moving object. And sometimes that just involves a lot of real detail. Like I have the bicycle, there's a bicycle panel here, maybe I can find it for you, where my character Meg is riding her bike through the city, and it's really just a matter of, here we go, I bet I could pull it up. Here we go. It's really just a matter of rendering the city, right? It's not, the bike is hard, but the city is so much more work. You really have to, oh, here we go. Where is it? There we go. Okay, see this one. So you see, like the motion is the entire world is moving. That's how they do it in Japan. Rather than the character moving. In American comics, it's like, let's draw Superman. How do we know that Superman is flying? We draw two lines behind Superman. So that tells you that, yes, I am observing Superman flying. Wouldn't it be cooler to be flying alongside Superman? That's the way they do it. But you can see how much work it took to work out the perspective and get that to be a convincing city behind her. Although also difficult to do the bicycle. But also what I discovered in using my models was don't take photos, take film, take motion. Because any gesture at all that you want to convey, there's a perfect moment. There's a moment at which the gesture looks right. It looks like what it is. Somebody giving somebody a hug. There are moments in that hug that don't look natural, and there are moments that do. When Muybridge, this guy back at the beginning of the century, he had those back for the last century. He was the one who, just prior to the invention of film, did those series of photographs. You've seen them of like horses galloping, people running. If you look at, let's say, his walking shots, right? He has like a man walking, and he's taking a photo again and again. It's just like click, 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 click. So he's isolating the individual gestures. Some of those just look wrong. They just look wrong. This does not look like walking, right? But we do that. We do that. Mobius had that once. I swear he was looking at Muybridge. Mobius drew that, and you're like, Mobius? That guy's just standing on his foot. It was wrong. But there's another moment, right, in that same sequence that's like, now that's walking, right? So what do? You take film of your models, and then you move the little scrubber, right? That's what we call it. It's a scrubber, I think. Is that right? Film people? You move the scrubber until you get just that exact moment, and it's like, there. That's it. That's what I was looking for. So that's on motion. See, that's only part one of the question. Closure. It's funny because that, for me, closure is dessert. Closure is the fun part. Asking my audience to fill in the blanks. Oh, God, I love it so much. I love challenging them to fill in the blanks. It's never hard. That's the fun part. That's the reward. The hard part is making an elbow that looks like an elbow.
Okay, our next question is right over here.
Hi, I am a children's librarian and reviewer, and the Kidlit world is abuzz right now because two of the biggest library awards, the Newbery and the Caldecott, had honors going to comics.
Yes.
And I was wondering, with all this buzz and excitement, especially with the Caldecott in particular, what your take is, or what you would say to someone who says that picture books and comics are just too different, and that they should have two separate awards, not like there are the Eisners, but saying that comics don't count as picture books and they have norms that are their own. And do you think that they have norms that are just so different than traditional picture books, and if so, what they would be?
Well, first, let's say their names. This One Summer by Jillian Tamaki and Mariko Tamaki received the Caldecott Honors Award. Have I got that right? It's the Caldecott, not the Newbery for them. Is that right? And then it was El Defo by, I've forgotten her name. Cece Bell, which I'm reading now and is terrific. That won the Newbery Honor Award. So this was historic because I believe both the Caldecott and the Newbery had not seen comics enter that field before. Am I correct? Yeah, so this was a real groundbreaker. As to the question of whether they should be separate, siloed, or whatever, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'm actually kind of split on that one. I take it from the tenor of your question that you think that that would be a mistake to separate them? Okay. I don't know, because, on the one hand, twice as many awards. So I'm not sure that's bad. If picture books, let's say, were just a genre, we're just all lumped together with children's books, one might say that they were not receiving sufficient attention. They don't have their own little ceremony. It's sort of like costume design gets its own award in the Oscars, and I think Edith Head was probably happy that day, not upset. But I don't know. I haven't really thought through the division. I have strong opinions about some stuff like that. Like, I actually do think comics should be segregated in bookstores because you usually start with a format. You're not in the mood to experience something about the Middle East. What format will I get? You kind of already know. You're either looking for a book, a comic, a movie, an audiobook, or whatever. And so it kind of makes sense for them to have their own section. I'm not sure about the awards, though. I actually don't know. I'm sorry. I don't have an answer for you. But I'm very good at talking for a really long time to say I don't know. Sorry.
Next question over here.
Hi. I'm a game art student at Columbia College Chicago, and I'm watching a lot of my peers drop out of their field out of fear. Is there anything you would say to those people, or advice you could give?
I can't advise somebody that it's their responsibility to go into a place, virtual or otherwise, in which they do not feel safe. That's a decision they need to make for themselves. I do think maybe, we can take a little comfort in the fact that Salman Rushdie, fingers crossed, is still around, as are, Anita Sarkeesian, is that how we pronounce it? It's a very depressing time when, when we see things like what happened in Paris. It's not the testament to the power of words and images that I hoped to be celebrating. It's depressing and frightening. It is an inevitable consequence of a networked world in which it shrunk to such a point where those who were 2 or 3 or 4 standard deviations for the meme, out on the shallow end of the bell curve, are cheek to jowl with us normal folks. And I don't know what the solution is. I'm really sorry to give you a couple of I don't knows in a row, but it's up to each individual.
But
it is often just talk, but that does not excuse it. However, it might give at least some comfort to those who feel as if they've got a gun pointed at their head. It is sometimes a toy gun, but I know that doesn't I know that obviously doesn't excuse it. I know that also that may not be sufficient reassurance. I hope people will look at courageous women and men, but people like Malala Yousaf, who faced down that kind of hatred and continued going. It can be done, but not everybody has the stomach for it, and I don't think we should expect everybody to have the stomach for it. It's a hard road. It's not for everybody, but let's be thankful for those who are willing to do it.
It's time for our last question.
Okay, I guess this is the last question.
No pressure.
So I am a high school English teacher in Chicago, and 98% Latino student body. Mm-hmm. So who should I put on my shelf for the Latino student population? They like the Black Spider-Man, they like Watchmen, and I know there's more out there, and I just don't know what it is.
Well, I'm sorry to say that when we think Latino comics, all those of us who love comics, we always think the same name first.
What's the name?
And that is the Hernandez brothers, who were just like an incredible, legendary group of artists. Jaime and Gilbert primarily, although Mario still sometimes makes comics. Their work is just world-class, and it's some of the very best out there. But one would hope all these years later that you would have a dozen names come to mind. And they're out there, but it's just the Hernandez brothers loom so large. They're like Mount McKinley over these other ranges. They're so important now in comics that's the names. Those are the names that come to mind.
Well, I didn't know that, so now I walk away with the Hernandez brothers.
Yeah, no, check out their collections from Abrams. I think it's Abrams, really big fat books, and then they have a lot of other format books. However, how old are your kids?
They should be okay with loving rockets.
Start with Jaime.
I want to thank everybody for coming this evening, and thanks to the Chicago Humanities Festival for putting this on, and thank you, Scott.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.